So Neha, I'm thrilled to have you on the podcast. As I was just telling, as we were just saying before we hit record here, you're my first very close friend that we've had on the podcast. So bear with me here as I transition from friend mode to work mode, but I'm still your friend.
I'm very honored. Thank you for having me.
So you're the founder of Mother Untitled. I'm lucky to call you a friend, and I'm thrilled to have you here. And I'm thrilled for your success with Mother Untitled. And I know you have an upcoming book as well. I want to hit the big headline.
Wow, you're going for it. Yes, I do. Yeah. I announced pre-orders as of today. And so it's an exciting chapter because I think this will be the first time Stay-at-Home Mother and the rebrand of Stay-at-Home Mother lands in the leadership category.
So let's back up here. We'll get to the book and what you're working on there in a moment. But I want to set the table here as far as what Mother Untitled is, the origins of it, because you began in the startup world doing brand strategy for companies like Zola. So talk to me about your story, your evolution from there to launching Mother Untitled and where you are today.
Well, you and I were joking about this before, but we were both sort of sitting and hiding in bar corners on our Blackberries once upon a time. And I was really devoted to my career in advertising and brand. And then it was the height of the lean in movement and the girl boss era. And I had my first son and I was rocking in that white glider that is no longer white. And I just thought, this is it. I want more peace in my life. I want more time with him. And I can honestly say, and I say this all the time, I don't think I made the choice to pause and downshift because I thought it was the right choice for him. I think all the data in the world shows that children are healthy and happy as long as they're the center of a parent's world, whether they work in the home or out of the home. I made that choice for me. And then I was walking around realizing that I was content, but culture had something else to say, right? I was hearing from just about everyone, what are you going to do all day? Did you waste your business school degree? And I think...
What year was this, Neha?
It was 2016.
Okay.
So I graduated Stanford in 2014. I'd landed, what was on paper, the dream job. And I think that what I was hearing was this cultural narrative that by choosing to pause my career, I was somehow giving up on my ambition. And I was somehow resigning to this sort of antiquated narrative of the June Cleaver from the 1970s. And I was looking around and I lived in the Flatiron, as you'll remember at the time. And I was meeting all of these incredible women. There was a banker from HSBC. There was the merchandiser from Scoop, RIP. And they were all either pausing or downshifting. And they had clocked in 10 years in their career. They had equitable relationships with their partners. They were noodling on freelance or gig work or saying, you know what, I've done this. I know I can transition back to the workforce eventually, but I want to enjoy this time. Or they were the women who said, I can't offset the cost of childcare right now, and I really want to be at home. And none of it matched the narrative we were being fed. And so I started planting the seeds for Mother Untitled really as what was effectively in 2016, 2017, a personal blog, Instagram, to say, you know what, there needs to be a more modern collective and representation of the woman choosing to lean into family life for a chapter.
It's not an either or, choosing home or choosing full-time work.
Not anymore. It was much more black and white once upon a time, right? So if you were looking back in the 1970s when that first archetype of the quote unquote stay-at-home mother emerged, also, by the way, due to the rise of media and television and advertising, we were seeing that portrait, but we never really evolved as technology evolved that image. And the reality, as you know, is that the landscape right now allows women to stay connected to the workforce and personal and professional pursuit in a way that they've never been able to in generations prior. Men and their partners are much more involved than ever before, as you know personally. Men today are spending over 3 times the amount of time with their children than before. So we're looking at a very different generation of women who are having kids later. So they have accrued education and work experience to draw upon. So, it was time to catch up the narrative. It was time to blur the edges between the antiquated notions of stay-at-home and working mother, because the reality is there's a vast, vast in between, and so many more of us are existing in between.
Yeah, and it's so interesting. It's not that long ago, 2016, but it feels like the narrative has changed so much. The girl boss, the lean in era. Obviously, we had a pandemic somewhere in between there, technology shifting, Zoom, hybrid, etc. So, now just even reflecting, it's been a little less than a decade so far. Where would you grade us in terms of where things have gotten? To what extent do you think things have gotten better, and where do the biggest challenges lie when it comes to where American society is on this?
So it's so interesting you asked that. When I think back to 2016, when I was researching this platform and I was sort of building my case for it, I was looking at the Pew data. And one of the things that struck me about millennial women was that we were really identifying with ambition, but we were equally identifying with motherhood. We really wanted to be present parents. And so those two things were starting to butt up against each other. And equally, we were seeing the rise of flexible workplaces like the Wing and WERK Work. I don't know if you remember that, but that was a platform started by Annie Dean to promote flexible work among women. And that was in 2016. So the writing was on the wall that there was going to be time for reexamination. And then the pandemic accelerated that. So where we are now, flash forward almost 6 or 7 years, is that we are really at this moment that is so ripe for reexamination and redefinition. I think we're seeing corporations start to walk back some of their remote policies, and they're trying to figure out how does this work for them in the structures that have previously served them well. And we're seeing men and women equally say flexible work is important to us. And I think as we sort of expand the pool of what does work mean, what we see is a huge ability for parents to say, these flexible work structures work better for us for these chapters. There is more fluidity between work and life. And I think the bottom line is that the pandemic and the recession that followed it put a point that work and family are not the same. We were a generation that said work is your family. And then we came to the harsh realization that those two things are very different. And one is more important than the other. And I think our culture is waking up to that fact. So for this, from the stay-at-home mother perspective and career pause perspective, I think we are at a place where normalizing that and changing the narrative is getting far more widely accepted than ever before.
So getting into the nuances of it, I mean, there's career pause, there's gig economy. Take me through, I mean, is there a kind of defined levels, or how many variations on this are you seeing right now when it comes to variations of the pause?
So when we ran our survey, so we commissioned a survey last year called the American Mothers on Pause. We ran it with Proof Insights, a firm out of Maryland, and we polled about 1,000 members of the general population and 1,200 stay-at-home moms. What's wild is 1 in 3 women are considering a pause in the next 2 years. 1 in 2 are considering a downshift. The way we qualified it was less than 20 hours, right? Okay. And so, when you qualify it that way, the numbers tell a different story. But there is a world where when you're looking at the data more broadly, and the freelance economy includes 74 million Americans right now, this is a far broader swath than previously thought, right? But I think—
you're talking about almost a third of the workforce, a quarter to a third of the workforce.
Correct. Yeah. Correct. And by the way, this is not just men or women. 1 in 5 stay-at-home parents right now are dads, and that number is ticking upwards. So I would venture to say it's going to be 2 in 5 as of sort of 2 years from now. And so this is no longer a gendered issue. And then the other part is, I think this is no longer a wealthy issue either, right? So 62% of women choosing to pause are doing so because they can't offset the cost of childcare. Right. So this is no longer a niche. As it relates to sort of the definition of a career pause, it would be quote unquote full-time caregiving. But the reality, what we know about full-time caregivers right now, or modern women on a career pause, is that they're still connected to some sort of volunteering, online certification, professional development. And why that's important is because if we can sort of rewrite this narrative that women or men who are choosing to pause are stuck or stagnant or shut in and not growing, we reduce the penalty and sort of raise the respect so that when and if they do choose to return to the workforce, and they do, right? We know that 90% eventually want to return to the workforce. We can better support them, better respect them on the other side.
One of the, the stark numbers that I always see when the data variations of the data comes out, is the amount of career earnings and promotions that women lose when they choose to have children and return. Did you dive into that at all in your survey? And how is that trending right now in terms of just the again, the impact, the lifetime impact of taking that pause?
It's interesting you bring that up. I did not dive into it for our survey, but I did dig into it in writing the book, because as we crafted the narrative around the book, the first 3 chapters are all about preparing for the pause. And part of that means going in with a very clear view of what the risks may be. And what was fascinating is for so long we've talked about the motherhood penalty, and we've always assumed that the motherhood penalty is steeper if you take a career pause. The reality is actually, given the discrepancy in pay equity between men and women in general, if we're, the exact numbers are failing me right now, but say it's 80 cents to the dollar or 85 cents to the dollar. Women who take a pause, it's actually only 79 cents to the dollar. So the actual reduction in potential salary on the other side doesn't take as extreme of a hit as we've talked about previously when compared to the reality of difference between men and women, more generally speaking.
So the main hit there is having the kids, whether you take a pause afterwards or not, sort of negligible.
Correct. Now, what's interesting is women, and I love the confidence of these women, but I was actually stunned to see that the women who we surveyed, and this was consistent with census data, report absolutely no concern that they won't get a similar salary when they return. And I think that that is a strong belief in their capacity on return. They may look for something different. And that's actually an interesting slice of the data that, if I were to run the survey again in 5 years, I'd be really curious to dig into. I wonder how much of salary is traded off, in part because when women return to the workforce, whether they're returning after 1 year or if they're returning after 5 years, they prioritize less stress and more flexibility. And so by nature of what they're optimizing for, that role may in fact pay less than another role. And I think that they very clearly stated in the research that they were willing to offset a salary hit to have more room for family life. And a room doesn't always include hours. Room also includes headspace, as we both know.
Yeah, I want to get to a bit of that, because in going through the numbers on your survey, I was struck by a few of them. 79% of women agree or strongly agree with the following statement: most people don't understand the work that goes into being a stay-at-home mom. 68%, 2/3 of stay-at-home mothers say they feel underappreciated. Stay-at-home mothers put their kids' emotional health first on the priority list, rarely consider their own. When asked how they measure success, only 1 in 5 selected their own mental health.
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot to say about this.
Yeah.
So let me know where you'd like me to start.
Well, it's interesting. We keep talking, we've been talking so far about the workplace, but these numbers really speak to what's going on at home.
Mm-hmm. And I think they if you start at this idea of misunderstanding, because I think that's the most compelling data point, right? And it's really at the core what Mother Untitled was about as the resource for career women leading into family life. We want to validate her work, because when we validate that work in the home and infuse it with respect and dignity, she's better able to advocate for support. She's better able to advocate for help so that she can invest in herself. And she is better able to speak about her story when she returns to the workforce. So when we talk about misunderstanding, if you dive into the research anecdotally, what women reported in their personal statements was this perception of being lazy, entitled, and bored. And the reality about modern caregiving is, and you know this, and you will continue to know this as they get older, as your daughter gets older, is it's immense, right? The intellectual labor of parenting is immense. It's not just the laundry and the dishes. It's navigating complex healthcare systems. It's going down the Google rabbit hole about allergies and potential neurodivergent issues as you observe your child navigating this thing called life. It's dealing with those really complicated questions at bedtime that force you to really harness your ability to communicate. It's dealing with those temper tantrums. And by the way, I think this is why some of the work from Dr. Emily Oster, Dr. Becky Kennedy has been so profound, because it's really shined a light on how much of parenting is actually growing and developing ourselves. And that work is the actual invisible work of
we just had
parenthood.
Elisa Pressman on this podcast, who has a new book out on this as well.
Yes, she does. And she, and I think what her work has done is really reminded women that, yes, you can subscribe to the $231 million of parenting books that are sold in America annually.
Wait, hold on. So we spend $230 million a year on parenting.
Millennial women.
Just millennial women.
Just millennial women. Mm-hmm. And I'm not actually, in the number, so I'm hesitant to give it, but it's in the mid to high hundreds. I want to say 190 million on podcast consumption. And so we are just consuming so much content. And part of that is an issue with just content overwhelm. And part of it is that we are navigating unprecedented times, right? Our kids are coming home asking really big questions. And we want to understand that. What I think Dr. Pressman is saying so beautifully is part of this is also coming back to the basics. And now we're going through another sort of intellectual exercise of, okay, how do we parse through all the information and then come back to what is true to our family and what is unique to our child? And that is tremendous work. And so, I think if we go back to that data point about feeling misunderstood and underappreciated, the reason it's so relevant is it's one part because if we look at that work as immense as it is, we then say to that population of women or men, if they choose to exist in a career pause for a chapter, you have developed so much in creativity, in patience, in organization, in time management, in perspective. You are a valuable addition when and if you choose to return to the workforce, number one. Number two, during their time at home, however long that chapter exists, they're better able to say to their partner, I've done tremendous work by the end of the day at 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock. When you return, now you and I block and tackle because we're both done with our quote unquote work day. And now we're going to share the load at home. Or, by the way, when we are sharing our finances, we are an interdependent organization. You are absolutely working out of the home and providing a salary. I am doing all of this incredible, deep work that cannot be outsourced or could be, and it would come at a huge cost. And so you depend on me to do that so you can focus on the work outside of the home. And so we really start to re-examine these ideas of dependency. We re-examine this idea of value. We re-examine basically the ability, and this gets to your last point that you brought up from the survey, that they rate their mental health as not a priority because so many women, and I heard this in interviewing, felt like as soon as they chose to pause their paid work, they no longer deserved support. And they started to rank everyone else's success ahead of their own. And so if we can flip the script and say, you are so worthy and doing such immense work, and by the way, your whole household benefits from you being supported, it changes the whole paradigm in which she's able to walk through this stage of life with empowerment and care.
Yeah, healthy mom equals healthy family equals healthy kids equals healthy relationship and healthy partner.
And healthy community and healthy world,
Yeah, it's something came up in our conversation with Elisa Pressman. We also had Jennifer Wallace, who had a book out recently called Never
Enough.
Yeah.
Jenny's great.
And
she has another one coming out about parents mattering as well. So she's taking that concept and extending it to parenting parents themselves.
We just talked about the parenting book industry. We got some more books coming your way. everybody. But these are, I think, really important conversations. And one of the themes I took away, and something you're getting at here, is the need for mom's mental well-being, their own community, prioritizing their friendships. As you talk about this, this is something that's come up. We have a 7-month-old at home, and Alex will say this. My wife Alex will say this, that like one of her keys to her mental health so far has been one of her mom communities, Misha Pods, incidentally founded by a college classmate of mine, Marika. That has made all the difference. Having that community aspect, having the people who are in the trenches every day, going through some of the same things.
And if you talk to Jenny Wallace, I think one of the things when she and I spoke that stayed with me was that when she interviewed all of the families who were considered quote unquote healthy strivers, right? These are the families that towed that beautiful line between cultivating ambition, but creating a safe environment for their children. The unifying factor, the one thing that was common among all of those families, was that the mothers invested 1 hour with another friend. The reason why is because when that mother, and I'll use my own example, is up at night Googling, why is my child throwing cars? This was get ready for age 3.
Right. Why did my kid bite somebody? Why did my kid? Yeah.
You then go and have a conversation with another friend, and lo and behold, no, your child is not a sociopath, and suddenly you are sleeping better again at night, and you're able to sort of create that healthy, nurturing environment that we want for our children to be able to grow and explore who they are with an understanding, supported parent. And so, and one of the things that is interesting, the tropes around stay-at-home motherhood, is that you sort of trip and fall into this mom squad, the things of Sex and the City lore. And the reality is, and I tell every new parent, is that sometimes you just need the good enough friend. You just need that cohort of women who are sort of walking that same stage of life with you, and they don't need to be your best friends. These friends don't need to last for the rest of your life. They will turn over and over again. But I think parenting can actually be an incredible time that is so ripe for networking. And I actually think that's one of the unfortunate parts of this stay-at-home archetype, is this idea of a woman who's shut in and buried under laundry. And the reality is so many women are meeting on the playground, meeting in mom groups like Alex is. And you can attest to this with Alex and the Misha Pods. They're not just talking about when their child crawls or when their child, walks. They're actually talking about really big ideas and what they might want next and how their perspectives are evolving and how their relationships are evolving. And when we start to explore that nuance, that actually your playground conversations can actually be such incredible networking.
Yeah.
We start to be able to go back to what I was calling this sort of vast gray area where, yes, a woman might be on a career pause, but she's actually discovering all of these other interests and learning so much from a really diverse population that she might not have met in the traditional confines of the workforce.
Yeah, I mean, so much of the conversations they're having about their partners, about their own mental health, about their professional ambition, a whole variety of things. And it comes at a time where it's getting much easier through technology, et cetera, to be more entrepreneurial as well.
Yes. I mean, I think you see this with, and I really hate the phrase mompreneur, so let's just cut that out of this conversation.
We're not going to
use that here. But yeah. I think, this idea of women both having access to consulting opportunities, freelance opportunities, and then if they want to test and explore a concept, you have tools like Squarespace, you have tools like Masterclass to start to learn the skills to help you to do that. And, there is no time like a career pause when you've already checked your ego about your career at the door. Mm-hmm. You've really reconciled identity to say, actually, I'm starting to get really clear on what matters to me. And I think, when you poll women entrepreneurs, especially ones who have families, the number one reason for investing in their own business is for autonomy. right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you start to see women testing and exploring new ideas, in part because they're planting the seeds for what that next chapter could look like, knowing that flexibility is going to be key.
Some would say a critique would be that you have to have a certain level of privilege to be able to even consider a career pause.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
As you're writing this book and you're considering, and even if you're talking about hybrid work, right? Hybrid work is only possible for certain types of work. Certain work will still require you to go in day in, day out, lackluster flexibility to be able to, take your kids to school or deal with doctor's appointments because it is what it is. So where do things stand there?
I think the first thing I'll say is I'm just so glad you used the word privilege, because I think for too long, we have associated stay-at-home motherhood with luxury, right? We have assumed that if it's a luxury that a woman can stay at home, that role must imply leisure or imply laziness. And so there lie in the tropes. The reality, what we know, is that 1 in 3 women don't choose to pause. They have to pause because they can't afford the cost of childcare.
Especially in recent years, right?
Especially in recent years. And that number's trending upward, right? The middle area, the 60% would say financial dynamics in the household, including the cost of childcare, was a determinant, was a factor in their decision. So this is not a financial no-brainer for many women. That said, there are many women, me included, who had the privilege to get to choose. And so I don't think the privilege is to stay at home. The privilege is not to be a stay-at-home parent or a working parent or exist in between. The privilege is simply to get to choose. And after that, the goal is to use that privilege to be able to change the narratives about all the choices so women can make that choice for whatever reason they have to, without penalty and with a lot of support.
One thing that often comes up on our newsfeed at Mo News, I know comes up over on the Mother Untitled Instagram page, is sort of where America ranks when it comes to paid family leave. In some of the maps, it's gobsmacking because you look at a global map and we're like one of 6 countries left that don't have certain policies in place, and countries that you wouldn't expect to have policies. They have incredible policies.
Mm-hmm. Estonia always shocks me every time.
Estonia, Iceland, 1.5 years maternity leave. It's just like, by the way, different societies, 300,000 people live there. Mm-hmm. It's a different reality to America, but still, we rank pretty much at the end when it comes to that. We're seeing slowly but surely some states pick up the slack from the federal government. Businesses pick up the slack. The leave aspect, how does that impact decisions to pause and return to work?
I'll tell you that the saddest messages I get via DM on Instagram are the women who are 2 weeks postpartum and saying, I want to pause. What should I do? No woman should have to make that colossal of a decision while they are still healing from childbirth. So I think paid family leave, or the lack thereof in this country, impacts this particular part of the conversation because it expedites the decision-making process. And we all know knowledge is power, right? So much of being able to step into a chapter of stay-at-home motherhood with power is to be able to plan for it. So what I will often tell women who are choosing to pause or deliberating a career pause in such a short amount of time is try and first of all, punt that decision for as long as humanly possible. And then, if you can, line up the childcare, line up the support to be able to transition back in a way that works for you. Then give yourself an increment of time. By that, I mean, give yourself 3 months or whatever feels right. It could be an additional 6 weeks, 8 weeks of going in and seeing how that feels. Seek out mentors, seek out other women who've walked the path before, see what your other options are. As we talk about the vast gray area between stay at home and working, it is not always as black and white as full pause or stay, right? We know that there's so many hybrid options. There are part-time options, there's contract options. Seek out options that might work for you. Test and learn as much as you can, get as much data as you possibly can. And then you can also take the time with your partner while you are healed to do the financial planning. Going back to the conversation of privilege, the reality is it is not a financial no-brainer to part with a part of your household income. And you want to make sure that both partners recognize the value in the partner who's staying at home. So having those conversations to make sure your marriage is sturdy, your partnership is sturdy, that you've planned accordingly, that you know that you will have support. It all takes time. And unfortunately, this country doesn't afford women time, both to enjoy parenthood, but to plan for their options. So my best advice is it's on us to sort of forge that path for ourselves and explore our options on our own time.
Yeah, you were mentioning the prep for it, and that's something that Alex and I tried to do a bit of on the advice of folks ahead of a first child. One of the smaller things we did, but actually it turned out to evoke some really good conversations. She got this fair play card deck from Eve Rodsky, where literally it was like, okay, who's handling this? Who's handling this? And I think it was up to 100 different things. It's like, who's going to do the laundry? Who's going to focus on the kids' math homework? And things that some of which we won't have to deal with for several years. But at the end, you're like, okay, how many cards do you have? 27? What do I have? 15? How many hours do we think that accounts for? But I think it was a really helpful exercise.
Well, and I think what Eve did so well, and I'm partial, she and I share an editor for our books. And so she's a friend. And I think and I do believe that she paved the way in a big way for the Power Pause, my forthcoming book, because I think what she was able to do is visualize and quantify unpaid labor. Right. And she was really able to substantiate this is real work with a lot of tasks.
Laundry, dishes, clean, you add it up and you're talking about a significant amount of time every week.
And I think one thing that's interesting that you pointed out is at any given time, you might have 27 cards and she might have 57 cards or whatever that math adds up to. Yeah. And the reality is it's not about how many cards. It's about the fact that you're having the conversation. Right. It's not always going to be equal, but it should be equitable. Right. And so, as you know, my husband was running a tech company for the majority of years. I was fully at home and I knew there was a real reality of how much time he had available, but we continuously had a conversation about what was possible, how he could support. And I think the other part is we get to recalibrate over and over again. And he does more than his fair share and then some now while I'm dialing up. And I think so much of marriage and parenting and sharing the load is about recalibrating year over year. And I think the same logic applies to so much of work and family. Is your children need different things at different stages. One of the, big tropes about stay-at-home motherhood is that it's so demanding from 0 to 3, and that's when most women pause. The reality is most women pause between 8 and 13 right now. So when we polled women staying at home, of the 1,200 women who are full-time at-home parents, the majority had children between the ages of 8 and 10.
Have they explained why? Why is that shifted? Or maybe it was always the case?
I think a lot of times it's when they add a child into the mix. I think that, once you have multiple children, sort of the balance between work and life shifts. And it's harder to compartmentalize. It's harder to, use the time off hours to the child at home. So I think that shifts the dynamic. I think we're also seeing a huge rise in mental health issues between, around those ages. The homework ticks upward around those ages. So we find care needs evolve. And I think, there's no one size fits all. And one of the blessings of this moment in time, and I think this generation, is we're really recalibrating around nuance. There's a lot of nuance around caregiving. There's a lot of nuance around work life. And I think we're just exploring sort of how do we push out of what we thought we knew and explore some other solutions.
One of the numbers that came out of your survey as well and it speaks to, the theme we've been talking about here, help, is that stay-at-home mothers can be hesitant to get childcare. 29% don't use childcare, including family help. More than 1 in 3 stay-at-home moms feel guilty paying someone to watch their kids because they don't earn their own salary.
It is the universal thread between every woman. And by the way, privilege aside, of every woman I have interviewed for the book, aside from this survey, women I've gotten the chance to speak to who are educated, empowered, have equitable relationships, have the financial means.
Have the financial means to get help and choose not to.
Correct. And by the way, I was one of those women, as you know. I had my own blocks around it. And I think, part of that was my personality, and part of that was really wanting to enjoy my children. And part of it was I felt, and so I know that this is reflective of my community as well, that my job was now to caregive. And so if I outsourced any part of that, what was I doing? Mm-hmm. And what we know is caregiving is so much more than the hours present with the child, right? Like there's all sorts of other household administration. We've talked about the intellectual labor. We also know that just simply being present isn't enough. We need a healthy caregiver. And so, a big part of this goes back to rewriting the value and worth of unpaid caregivers or stay-at-home mothers, or as I like to say, women on career pauses, so that they feel and they know that their work is of such immense value that they deserve the support. No one should have to do a job 24/7 without breaks, right? Like that's just not, we would never expect you to do that. We would never expect you, even though I know you've had those periods in your career, Mosh, but
I'm working. I've been gradually over, even the time you've known me, Neha, I'm working on my work addiction. And honestly, it's become a bit easier having a child, as in I'm like, oh, that doesn't matter. Like I want to be there for bedtime. I want to read her a book. I want to play with her a little bit. And if it means that something that I would have prioritized not so long ago professionally isn't happening, that's okay. Well,
perspective is a superpower. And I think it is the gift of parenting. You just realize what matters and you become ruthless about your time. But I think women without the cultural recognition around the work or the cultural value for parenthood, we've sort of cast shame on women for getting paid help, especially, but any help if they step into chapter stay-at-home motherhood. And that's obviously a huge part of, we have a chapter in the book that really talks to a swath of experts who would all say it's not only good for the mother, it's really good for the child. It's, the child gets used to other caregivers. They get, a different energy from their lead parent. And I think also, in this sort of broader look at career pauses as power pauses, right? As a time for women to continue to grow and thrive, the ability to invest in support allows her to invest in herself, whether that's picking up a new hobby, whether it's meeting up a new friend, whether it's keeping herself in the career game. And the last thing I would say about household help, just like we were talking about earlier, this idea of being an interdependent organization, right? Is that household help does not come out of the woman's salary. It comes out of the household salary, right? So she does not need to earn the right to have her family be supported. And that's a mutual discussion between both partners, including the partner working outside of the home, to say, how much do we want to budget? How important is, the mental health of both parents, having this household feel less stressed? Let's allocate a portion of the budget to the household help, whether that's meal delivery service, whether that's a babysitter for a few hours, or whether it's a part-time nanny.
Right. Looking at the budget holistically and be like, is it worth, not taking a family trip this year or a vacation or what, like allocating it for the sake of our mental health for a longer period of time.
And it's the family's mental health. So we're budgeting toward that. We're not just saying, the woman needs to earn that side of it. And that, by the way, that logic, I want to be very clear, that logic also applies to the partners when they're making the decision about whether one of them should pause or not pause based on the cost of childcare, right? That childcare comes out of the household's income, and it can't just be equated to sort of one person's salary.
I had one follow-up question. We were talking about paid family leave, maternity leave, etc. One of the stories that probably got the most amount of comments and messages that it covered in recent months was the controversy at Kite Baby. And if you remember, the CEO of the baby clothing brand rejected medical leave, fired a mom after her son was in the NICU. But I think the more shocking thing to folks was not necessarily that incident in particular, though shocking enough, was the fact that a female entrepreneur, mom-run company with product that is being marketed to other moms had like a 2-week maternity leave policy, something very little. And I think as an outsider, I found that surprising because I was like, well, given who the customers are, given who the CEO is, I would have expected something different. And I don't know, I mean, is that representative? Is that sort of unique to Kite Baby? Or is this something that we see also with other female-led companies that I would have assumed differently, but yeah.
You know what I think? I think it's small businesses are in the wild, wild west right now. Our country has left that level of decision-making and policy-making to small business owners as opposed to taking that initiative themselves, right? And so I can't comment on the nuance or the sort of complexity of that decision that founder made.
Mm-hmm.
I think the idea of 2 weeks maternity leave is just unacceptable for anywhere. Unfortunately, it is more normal than it should be in this country. I do think it is indicative of a need in this country to start to put together scaffolding to support small businesses or medium-sized businesses in offering benefits to their employees. Because what's interesting, and this is probably a whole other podcast, is I really have a thesis that women, with the rate of women starting their small businesses, and we saw that rise since the pandemic, for autonomy, are now employing other women, right? And on a flexible basis. So we're creating a flexible work ecosystem, amongst ourselves, almost paving this whole sort of sub-economy among mothers, right? And I speak to my own team. I have 5 women who work, anywhere from 10 hours a week to 10 hours a month, right? And and yet it is, I get away with it a little bit because it's all, it is so few hours. But the reality is that we're left to our own devices as small businesses. And if the big businesses haven't figured it out, small businesses definitely can't. And I actually think, paid family leave is one sort of piece of the puzzle. I think a lot about also universal health care. What would that do for our economy, right? If we're looking at this rise of entrepreneurship and we're looking at the rise of freelancers, is that a potential avenue that we could explore to open up a more expansive pool of work options for parents, especially who need the flexibility? And what would that do for our economy? So, I think that there's sort of multiple vectors that our government needs to step up on. And so it's hard to comment on one business because I think it's part of a bigger ecosystem.
One question I have as a media site myself, and you're putting out content daily over there on Mother Untitled, is where you're finding news related to your world, resources. We talked about the huge book industry and the podcast industry, but Neha, where are you learning about these issues? What people are confronting, new trends, et cetera. Because I will say this, I spent 15 plus years in network news, cable news, and now as a new father, as a partner, I'm actually astounded by the lackluster coverage by major media of the issues that are hyper relevant to just so many Americans. So where are you turning to for that coverage? And what are some of the resources, websites, social accounts, podcasts that are your go-tos?
So glad you asked. So I happen to really support the work of Chamber of Mothers. I know you spoke to Lauren Smith Brody a while ago. I think she and the team there have really kept a finger on the pulse of core issues relevant to paid family leave, but also maternal mental health. I think Reshma Sajani's work for Moms First is really important. I think not only as a coalition for getting us closer to paid family leave, but really keeping a finger on the pulse of what's evolving, what needs to happen to get us closer. Catherine Goldstein is a journalist from The Double Shift. She used to have a podcast called The Double Shift. She wrote a great paper on work and family recently that I think some of that kind of deep dive into policy is really, really helpful because it takes sort of a top of the year view of all of the interdependencies, right? Oh, how does insurance, how does universal health care map to paid family leave? Well, some of the sort of daily social media accounts, kind of you can get lost in the fray. I think Elliot Haspel, I don't know if you followed his work at all. He has recently written a lot for The Atlantic. He is a journalist and a policy expert. I think he has some great insights. So if you want to follow him on LinkedIn. And Rebecca Gale. So she is a writer for New America Lab and does a phenomenal job in reporting from a really unbiased perspective.
So your community has grown immensely on Instagram. Congratulations.
Thank you.
How do you engage with them? So I'm talking more as a fellow creator here on social media. What have you learned from folks from your community over time? How has that impacted what you're covering and frankly, what we can expect from your book?
So it's interesting because I mentioned a core team of great thought partners who really help a lot with the content and resources on site. So if you come to the content on site, you'll see we sort of cover core pillars, core subsets of the Mother Untitled audience. So women preparing for a career pause.
This is over at motheruntitled.com.
Correct. Okay. Embracing a career pause, blending, so navigating the gray area or planning on a full return. And so we have a sort of huge library of expert content and guides on each of those topics. We have mentors and we have a Flex Jobs board to help women stay connected to a sense of possibility. I won't hand over social. I don't know where you are on that, but Instagram to me it still feels like the heartbeat. I think, I planted seeds for this platform there and it has grown organically. And so those women write to me with very personal stories. And I think oftentimes it's seeking a lot of the content I'll share there are the reframes, right? It's the reframing this idea of ambition, success, productivity, giving permission to be able to enjoy this chapter and set goals for themselves and invest in their own ideas and create rhythms that don't mean they have to do it all, but that they can do this in a way that they enjoy it and it isn't picture perfect, permission to get help. And then also the confidence that, this is a time for them to explore and come out the other side with an incredible amount of skills and confidence and perspective. So, and that follows the arc of the book, really, preparing for the identity shift, for the financial shift, knowing when you're resigning that this isn't a career ender, walking through the stage of life with more joy and confidence, and then coming out the other side in one piece.
I wanted to follow up on something you said earlier. You mentioned your own block about getting help. How did you work through that?
My husband was a great asset. I think he really was able to make the case that I would be a better parent if I was more supported, and we would be a better family if I was better supported. And I think that having a partner that really made it clear that I didn't have to earn the right for help, but it was a benefit and budget allocation for our whole family and an investment in the health and happiness of all of us, that moved the needle. And not all women have that, which is why I get to take that experience.
I mean, some women deal with the opposite.
Very much so. And,
Yeah.
we have a lot of scripts on site. I mentioned the content, but in how to talk to partners about that and how to, because sometimes it's talking to your partner about blocking and tackling. And by the way, I make Dan out to sound like a saint, but he also realized that if I got 15 hours of a babysitter, he then didn't have to come home as early, or he got an extra gym run. So let's all call it spade a spade.
Dan only wants to focus on the first part of your statement. Nah.
Correct.
Yeah.
I just wanted to make sure
the altruistic version of the story.
I just wanted to make sure I was giving a balanced view.
Yeah, we appreciate that.
Thank you. And so I think a big part of our messaging is to really help women get the language they need, that they can self-advocate and that they can believe they deserve that help, because we all deserve to be healthy and supported. That's a fundamental right.
Neha, it was a pleasure to have you for this conversation. I know that people will find this incredibly helpful. So thank you for sharing all your learning so far, and congrats here on the new book. Tell folks again where they can find you, how they can find you, and how they can pre-order the book.
You can come to motheruntitled.com and you can check out our resources or pre-order the book, The Power Pause, which comes out January 14, 2025, or you can follow and connect with me on Mother Untitled on Instagram.
Neha, thank you.
Thank you. This was such a pleasure.